This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Coming up tonight, we're going to speak to trial lawyer Robert Barnes to get the very latest on Trump's hush money trial. Plus, Joe Biden's approach to Iran and the conflict in the Middle East is under more scrutiny. Gosh, I wonder why. Plus, creepy Joe Biden shares some famous family recipes. You're not going to want to miss this. But first, I've talked before on this program plenty of times about how there is a two-tiered system of justice in the United States. You know, one that sees the law applied differently depending on whether you are a regular U.S. citizen or whether your name happens to be Donald J. Trump. Now, in the past, I've said that the U.S. is rapidly sliding towards banana republic status, what with those in power, the Biden cabal, trying to jail the opposition leader, that is to say, Trump. But nowhere, and I mean nowhere in the U.S. are things as bad as they are in New York City, which is Trump's old hometown and now ground zero for the effort to twist the law to stop the man from ever returning to the White House. Let's take a look at the hush money case that is now playing out in New York City and which may go on for weeks, if not months. Well, what's the issue here? They say it's about whether Donald Trump conspired to hide a hush money payment to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, before the 2016 election to conceal an alleged affair, lest it affect his chances at the polls. Go figure. Now, the issue is not so much the payment, but how it was treated for accounting purposes. Like, was it written down, hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, or was it hidden around some other things that made it an in-kind contribution to his campaign? And if it was, does that mean it was a whole conspiracy to interfere with democracy or sway the election? Now, the funny thing is about this is that in its general outline, this case has the same sort of vibe as when the Clinton campaign settled in 2022 its own case with electoral authorities after they did much the same thing, as one person said, lied to their own checkbook about when they paid to fund the infamous Steele dossier. But, of course, unlike the question of whether or not Trump had it off with a porn star, this issue had real consequences for our democracy and kicked off the whole Russia hoax. But never mind. You know how it is, and what might have been at most one misdemeanor count for Trump, which would have been around falsifying business records, has been spun by prosecutors into a whopping 34-count felony indictment. No one, by the way, thinks this is legally sound or that it will hold water, but it doesn't matter. Because, again, apparently, if it got out in the 2016 campaign that Donald Trump wasn't the poster boy for monogamy, well, you can imagine people's shock and horror. So, on the face of it, this whole thing seems ridiculous. I mean, especially because the same people pursuing Trump now are the same people who back in the days of Bill Clinton told us we were supposed to be sophisticated and European about these things. Anyway, if the hush money case is weak, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. First of all, there is the whole matter of the judge himself, Juan Merchan. Now, the Trump team has tried to make a big deal about the fact that Merchan is clearly a Democrat, and in 2020, hold on to your hats here, he gave the princely sum of $35 American to the Biden campaign. Now, if that was all there was, I'd say, come on guys, really. But as with so many other things in late Roman Republic America, for the Merchan family, being anti-Trump is really now a family business. Let me explain. Judge Merchan's daughter, that is the daughter of the guy overseeing the Stormy Daniels hush money case, is president of something called Authentic Campaigns. And that turns out to be a hard-left political consulting firm with clients like Adam Schiff, the Fang guy, the guy who led Trump's first unsuccessful impeachment trial. And then there's the jury pool. News came through in recent hours that they managed to seat a 12-person jury for the case, and, well, great. But remember that jury is drawn from a pool of New York City voters where something like 95% of the people on the rolls detest Trump. And from the start, the judge made it clear he didn't care about this at all. Listen to this description of what reportedly happened when Donald Trump's lawyers complained about a potential juror with anti-Trump stuff all over their social media.
She was interviewed and left the room, and then we didn't have the cameras on, so we didn't have a visual of Donald Trump at this point from the overflow room that I sit in. We have closed-circuit TVs, but the judge there was some back and forth between the lawyers, and then the judge actually admonished the former president because he was huffing and puffing and gesturing towards the juror. He said the judge said it was completely inappropriate, and he said, "I won't tolerate it. I won't have any jurors intimidated in this courtroom."
And other jurors have said that even if they want to be fair, well, they don't know how they can manage it, given the outside pressure from the media and family and friends to get Trump.
And she said, in part, that she got calls just yesterday alone from, quote, friends, colleagues, and family, quote, questioning my identity as a juror. She continued, "I don't believe I can be fair and unbiased and let the outside influences not affect me in the courtroom." This hits at the heart of the difficulty for these jurors over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks.
So from the Small Mercies Department, at least one juror who was seated was later dismissed after their anti-conservative vandalism was discovered.
This has to do with something that very well could have been the fact that this juror may have been arrested back in the 1990s conducting some type of political vandalism against something, posters on the right, and it was not revealed, or he did not remember it and did not include it, and that is why that juror has been dismissed.
Look, I'm sorry, but there's no other way to put it. This is a stitch-up. They don't really care if this case is so ridiculous that it gets thrown out on appeal. The point of this whole case against Trump is that the process is punishment, keeping him there, keeping him off the campaign trail for weeks and weeks. And there are three things one needs to say about this. First of all, to return to the original point, what's going on in New York, this is really third world stuff here. In no sane universe should a guy with such an obvious axe to grind, to say nothing of ridiculous conflicts of interest like this judge, be presiding over this trial. Hell, this trial, which again is over what, were this any other defendant, what would have been a misdemeanor at most, should never even have gone on, except for the fact that they need it to discredit Trump, damage his name, and keep him off the campaign trail. Now, second point, and this is just as important, partisan Democrats who have turned Trump into this sort of hate figure, like the monster in a German children's fairy tale, are setting an unbelievably dangerous precedent here. I know the Democrats think they are going to stay in power forever just by importing an endless stream of new voters. But, eventually that's just going to be impossible. Do they want to live in a world where being in opposition means not just being out of power, but also being relentlessly pursued through the courts, where even if the charges eventually fall over, the very process is punishment? Well, I don't think so, or again, at least I hope not. But finally, and this may be the most important point, Democrats are pursuing Trump ultimately for one reason and one reason only. They are worried that their candidate, Joe Biden, is so addled and his Bidenomics such a failure and the world such a mess under his watch that there is no way that they can win this election fair and square in November without knocking out his opponent in court. But let's turn this around, because if Donald Trump is the existential threat they say he is, if his victory would mean the end of democracy as we know it, well, as Joe Biden himself would say, maybe try a different candidate. It ain't that hard, folks. Well, thrilled to have back on deck here tonight former White House Chief of Staff, Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, and great friend of the show, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, thanks for coming on, and we're going to be talking a bit more later on in the show about the legals behind the Stormy Daniels hush money trial. But I want to talk to you about what the impact this might have on the election. Is this going to make much of a difference, or is this the whole thing just the obsession of niche elites who are never going to vote for Trump anyway?
It's a little of both, James. Keep in mind, there's not that many persuadable voters left in this country anyway. Between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you're dealing with two of the most well-known politicians of this century, for sure. But Trump is counting on having this help him politically, and I think he's probably right. Keep in mind, and you and I have talked about this before, this is by far the weakest of the four criminal cases against him. It's not about payments of hush monies to a porn star. This is about bookkeeping, whether or not he accounted for this properly as a business expense, and whether or not he properly followed the federal election rules and how you spend money in elections in this country. And if I just put half the audience to sleep, we also put about half the country to the audience to sleep. Polling has shown that an overwhelming majority of Americans just don't understand what the Trump supposedly did wrong here that merits a criminal investigation. So all of those things tend to work in his advantage as he tries to make himself out to be a victim, which he's done very successfully now for the past year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, Mick, some of us with long memories might remember when the shoe was on the other foot and it was Bill Clinton who was accused of having affairs, and you had people out there covering those up all the time for him. You know, everybody said, oh, well, let's just be really European about this. Who cares, right? But anyway, that was another time. But, you know, just on the polls, though, we've had another poll conducted by the New York Times, which shows that on a far more serious matter than Stormy Daniels, 64% of Americans approve of how President Trump handled the economy, and 63% of them disapprove of how Biden is handling the economy. Mick, I suspect that when it comes down to it, much more than what people do in their personal life, this may be where the election is decided.
It absolutely is. In fact, it's an interesting analog to a race you mentioned that I hadn't really thought about in a long time, which is the Bill Clinton. When he left office famously popular. Not only because people perceived the Republicans as having overreached in impeachment, but because the economy was doing really, really well. That's not where Joe Biden is right now. The economy is struggling. Inflation continues to be an issue in this country. While we're doing better than the rest of the world, that's really not what Americans want. They don't care if they're doing better than somebody else. They want a healthy economy. They want low gas prices and low food prices. And right now, they're not getting that. And it really makes it difficult for Joe Biden to talk about the economy. His former chief of staff this week, Ron Klain, famously said that Biden needs to stop talking about the blanking bridges. Nobody cares about bridges. They care about gas prices and food prices. When your former chief of staff is saying that, then you know you have a political problem. So the economy traditionally here drives elections. And if that's the case again in 2024, like it looks like it is, it's going to be an uphill battle for Joe Biden as we get to November.
Yeah, Mick, I mean, I just spent a week in the United States, and I tell you what, gas prices were still high, petrol prices still high, and people were talking about it. And just, you know, the amount of groceries, people be talking about it at the checkout lines in supermarkets in places which were, you know, pretty working class. So I think he's got some trouble there, but also he's got other trouble too with the Hispanic vote, which may be on the slide as well. Historically Democratic, a New York Times survey this week showed Biden has 50% support among Hispanics, a historic low, and Trump's support is growing. Does this show that Trump is really starting to break some of those long strangleholds on minorities, particularly urban minority blocs the Democrats have relied so much on in previous years?
I'll ignore for a second the fact you were here for a week, didn't call me. You and I can talk about that off the air. Yeah, those numbers, we're seeing those numbers across the board in different demographic groups. You see them right there in Hispanics. The number within the African-American group is probably, it's not as dramatic in terms of the top line numbers, but it's more striking in terms of its variance from historical averages. Typically, African-Americans in this country vote Democrat about 94% of the time. A Republican gets about 6% of the vote, which is what Donald Trump got in 2016. He got 12% in 2020. James, he's polling almost 24% right now amongst the African American community. That is just a geologic shift in American politics. And I think it comes back to what we've talked about at the opening, which is this weaponization of government. His message has been from these early days of these criminal pursuits. Look at me. Look what they're doing to me. If they can do this to me and I'm rich and I'm famous and I'm white, imagine what they can do to you. Vote for me and I'll make sure it doesn't happen. And that is resonating with a Hispanic community, the African American community. And if Donald Trump can continue that sort of dynamic, again, that compared with the weakness of the Biden economy is why Donald Trump is leading in most polls right now, if just by a small margin.
Yeah, and so, Mick, there's a lot of other issues still kicking around as well. I mean, obviously, the border is the big thing that so many people are concerned about. Impeachment articles were brought against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas this week, but completely shot down by the Democrats before anything could happen with them. This seems like just some political gamesmanship here, but I think it doesn't probably send a great message to Americans, does it, that Mayorkas is getting off scot-free for his mishandling of this?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks criticizing the Republicans in the House for bringing the articles of impeachment. Keep in mind, under our constitutional system, the standard for impeachment is a high crime or misdemeanor. And the Republicans, in some folks' minds, had a difficult time articulating what those high crimes and misdemeanors were. But that being said, the House did have a formal vote on articles of impeachment, and they passed. And then those articles were physically walked over to the Senate, and everybody expected the Senate to have a trial, and that did not happen. The Senate brought up a preliminary vote that essentially discharged that impeachment right away. So there was no hearing, there was no evidence, there's no nothing. And there's coming under a lot of criticism now, the Democrats in the Senate, for doing that, because it's a terrible precedent, James. You can imagine next time, say, Donald Trump is in office, and the Democrats take the House and the Republicans take the Senate, which right now is the way the math sort of looks, and the Democrats impeach Donald Trump again, will the Republicans in the Senate just dismiss the charges without a hearing? I think probably so. In fact, I think this is a precedent that will serve for a long time, and that any time a party thinks that any impeachment is too political, they won't have a trial in the Senate. I think that's a bad precedent.
Well, Mick Mulvaney, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time, and hopefully we can have that discussion over dinner and a wine one of these days. Thank you for your time, Mick Mulvaney. Now, let's get into the whole issues legally with Trump's hush money trial, which kicked off, of course, this week with the jury selection, and there is so much to pick apart here. I want to talk now to trial lawyer Robert Barnes, one of the great experts on many of these legal travesties that have been happening here. Robert, give us just sort of the update on the very latest in what's happening with this hush money trial in New York.
Well, a sham of a trial is now reaching its Soviet-style show trial portion of the case. We're having jurors being seated in the case who have open, overt hostilities to President Trump. The Constitution of the State of New York and the Constitution of the United States guarantees your right as an individual defendant in any criminal case to an impartial jury, just like it entitles you to an impartial, neutral judge. Yet here we have a judge whose family is involved in politics on behalf of the Trump's leading opponent, President Biden. We have the jury pool announcing their commitment. Some of them have said they have social media posts bashing and attacking President Trump. Interviews with several prospective jurors taken outside the courtroom showed extraordinary bias and prejudice against President Trump. The judge refuses to disqualify himself. He's now seated a partial prejudice jury, and Trump himself is still gagged. You have independent lawyers. A guy by the name of Good Logic is the name of his website, has filed a challenge with the New York Court of Appeals about the illegal gag order on President Trump. So it is a disgrace of a case that continues to showcase what's wrong with the American legal system right now.
Well, I mean, and it's not just really, Robert, the American legal system so much as it is the New York legal system here, because we have spoken about this in other cases in New York. But tell me about the jury selection in particular. My understanding is that the judge would look at some of these social media posts from people slamming Trump and saying, it's a close call. I'll let this person sit on the jury.
That's precisely the right. People that have called President Trump racist, sexist, called him names, attacked him personally, those people were considered close calls. Maybe that's good enough to sit on a juror and be an impartial jury concerning President Trump. It's a disgrace. He has sat jurors that later on he tried to seat some jurors who later on admitted that they were hopelessly biased against President Trump. And only upon their own confession were they removed from the jury pool. So they picked one of the most contaminated jury pools in the country for partisan prejudice to try President Trump.
Well, I mean, you know, Robert, we know that New York went, I think, 95% for Biden anyway, and for Hillary anyway. But, I mean, just in terms of that jury, too, was there a danger that activists who might be, you know, really committed to nailing Trump to the wall here, that some of them might have slipped through?
Well, apparently members of Democratic congressional staff who were part of impeaching President Trump, who had family members and friends on that congressional staff, were trying to get their way on the jury. And it only came out because some media members accidentally outed them. They even tried to delete their tweets later on that exposed it. So that's the degree to which it's like the D.C. trials. Martin Luther King in 1950s Birmingham with an all-white jury could get a more impartial jury than President Trump can get in the city of New York and in Manhattan with this judge presiding.
Yeah, and I mean, this judge seems to absolutely have it in for Trump. I mean, among other things, he's acting like, well, you know, he can't go to his kid's graduation. Donald Trump will not be allowed to go to his son Barron's high school graduation, which seems very churlish. But even more than that, on a legal basis, he's also saying that Trump can't be there for arguments in the Supreme Court in another one of his matters, essentially saying that this New York court is above the Supreme Court. This is real banana republic territory, isn't it, Robert?
Completely. It's interference with his ability to exercise his First Amendment rights in terms of campaigning, his First Amendment rights to petition the government, his First Amendment rights to be present in the Supreme Court when his oral argument is held, his right to be in court in either Georgia or the Florida federal case when substantive argument is being heard there. So it's continued constant, and that's not even to deal with his speech infringement that's taking place with this unconstitutional gag order, where witnesses are allowed to go out and lie about him on national TV, and he's not allowed to defend himself right in the middle of a campaign. This is extraordinary unconstitutional conduct by a judge who has long since lost the script of what the Constitution compels of him.
Well, it's not just this judge. There's also Judge Ergeron with the other New York matter, and I'm hearing that Trump's bond might be rejected in that case on a technicality. Are we going to start seeing potentially Trump assets once again, under the threat of seizure? And Robert, I mean, you know, what does this say to people doing business in New York that if they get involved in politics, they could wind up being on the wrong end of a judge with a grudge?
Completely. You have to get out of New York, unfortunately. It's what I advised clients about a decade ago about California, that the court systems were becoming compromised by political and partisan prejudice. And that if you became targeted by some rogue prosecutor, you could not rely or depend upon the New York judiciary to come to your defense, even where your own constitutional liberties were being violated and infringed. And here you have the former president of the United States, the leading candidate to be the next president of the United States, one of the most successful businessmen in the history of the city and state of New York, being prosecuted to such a degree that they're denying him rights of speech, they're denying him rights to impartial trials, they're denying him rights of immediate appeal on immunity issues, and now they're even trying to deny him the right for bail pending appeal and bond pending appeal in the case of the civil case, and using every trick in the book to do it. They want to bankrupt him, they want to jail him, they want to destroy him politically and electorally and legally, and they're doing so in a manner that makes a joke of the New York justice system.
Robert Barnes, we're going to have to leave it right there, but I think that a joke is the only thing that we can describe it. We'll come back to you in a coming week to hear more about all of these Trump legal matters. Now, don't you go anywhere, because after the break, we're going to talk about the crisis in the Middle East and how it's been made worse by Joe Biden and his Obama-style foreign policy. But first, before we go to that, well, more footage has emerged documenting the slow and painful decline of Joe Biden from leader of the free world to Grandpa Simpson. Can you figure out where he's going with this?
One day I showed up at an off-year convention, and I was in the motel, after the local motel, getting changed after the afternoon session, go back to the evening session. I'd come down with some young activists, a little older than me, but still young activists, who were involved in trying to reform the party. And I was in one of those 8x10 bathrooms, they have, shower, toilet, and a sink, and I got a towel on me and shaving cream, and I hear bam, bam, bam at my door.
All right, Joe, you've got me hooked. Where is this going?
And I walked to the door and opened it up, and standing there was the former governor of the state of Delaware, Albert N. Carville, a big guy, about 6'5", talked at you like this. And the state representative who got defeated 4 years earlier as a Democratic state rep.
Now, I don't know. I think all of this is somehow sounding like I've heard this story before.
So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style at the time. Now, to take the ferry cost a nickel, and in those days, nickels had pictures of bumblebees on them. Give me 5 B's for a quarter, you'd say.
Give me 5 B's for a quarter. That's what you'd say. Foreign policy disasters with Batya Ungar-Sargon after the break. Welcome back to the program, and tons more to get through tonight, including how Joe Biden set the Middle East on fire. But first, for Donald Trump and Joe Biden, it is truly these days a tale of two cities. You know, the best of times, the worst of times, the spring of hope, the winter of despair, you know the rest. First, let's go to one city, New York, where in spite of a local judge trying to railroad Trump over the supposed stormy-in-a-teacup hush money scandal, many locals in Harlem are huge Trump fans, it turns out, especially after the former president made a visit to a bodega owned by a man who was sent to Rikers Island for acting in self-defense over the crime of fending off a violent robber who jumped the counter of his store. Have a look at this.
I love you, Trump! I love you, Trump! I love you, Trump! We love 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 Trump!
And here's a bit of what Trump had to say after the visit.
We're going to come in, and number one, you have to stop crime, and we're going to let the police do their job. They have to be given back their authority. They have to be able to do their job, and we're going to come into New York. We're making a big play for New York. Other cities too, but this city, I love this city, and it's gone so bad in the last 4 years, and we're going to straighten New York out. So running for president, we're putting a big hit for New York. We think we can win New York.
Did you hear that? New York is now in play. But now let's go to the second city, Pittsburgh, the heart of steel country in Pennsylvania, and an absolutely must-win state for whomever is to be the next president. Don't think these locals are too enamored with the idea of 4 more years of Joe Biden. Then the same day, Joe Biden went to his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, on the other side of the state to talk to union members. Check out the size of that crowd. It occurs to me that this could be a replay of 2016 when Trump won in part by getting out in front of more people at rally after rally. Could the same thing be happening again? Well, as the man himself says, we'll see. All right, let's talk about foreign policy now. Joining us to discuss what is going on in the Middle East and how Joe Biden has made it all incalculably worse, his great friend of the show, Newsweek editor, opinion editor, Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya, let's kick off with Joe Biden again proving he doesn't have a clue about the geography of the Middle East. Have a look at this.
And I made it clear to Israelis, don't move on Haifa. It's just not, I mean, anyway, I just...
Now, Batya, I don't know, the last time I checked, Haifa was a city in Israel. What is he talking about here?
Yeah, how unfortunate. Haifa is one of the major cities in Israel. It's a beautiful city. It's one of the cities where there are many, many Arab Israelis and many Jewish Israelis living in beautiful harmony together. It really is a utopian place. Of course, he meant that he's been talking to them about not moving on Rafah, which is the next frontier in the war to eliminate Hamas that Israel is waging very aptly in Gaza. You know, poor Joe Biden just can't keep the name straight.
Yeah, and Batya, we've seen this is just only kind of the slightly comical bit of what is actually a real tragedy that's playing out in the Middle East with Joe Biden's Iran policy. How much of this, too, is kind of a vindication of the Donald Trump foreign policy? I mean, the Abraham Accords under Trump, you saw finally that alignment of Sunni Arab interest, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, with Israeli interest, which is, of course, all of these states have a very huge interest in not seeing Iran and the mullahs in Iran become the dominant power in the Middle East, despite that being apparently what Barack Obama and now Joe Biden seem to want to encourage. So it's a bit of a vindication for the Trump foreign policy plan, isn't it?
It is such a good point, James. Donald Trump has saved thousands of Israeli and Palestinian lives with the Abraham Accords, because without that, many of those drones would have landed, and he's never gotten credit for this. He was able to pursue these peace accords between Israel and these Sunni Arab states, and we know that Saudi Arabia is keen to join despite everything that's happened since October 7th. President Trump never gets credit for this because the entire foreign policy expert class said it couldn't be done, and Trump showed up with 2 lawyers and his son-in-law, and they got that passed. It's a huge vindication. I'm so glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, but Batya, also, too, there are domestic considerations with this as well. I mean, we saw over the last week, the Golden Gate Bridge shut. We saw the approaches to O'Hare Airport in Chicago shut. You've got this sort of lunatic pro-Hamas activist class out there that seems determined to spread mayhem. How much of this is indicative that there's going to be a big problem for Joe Biden specifically at that Chicago Democrat convention that's coming out? And it feels to me like we're heading to a replay of 1968 when Lyndon Johnson had huge riots and unrest at his Chicago convention over the Vietnam War. It feels like we're very much seeing a replay of that now in 2024.
I think the difference being there was a lot of support for the protesters then. A lot of Americans were against the Vietnam War. 80% of Americans stand with Israel. And so this is, like you said, a lunatic fringe. It's an elitist fringe. All of the money from this is coming from elitist NGOs. All of the activists are from the over-credentialed, college-educated elites. Most of the activism is happening on college campuses, and they are deeply, deeply unpopular. People cutting off traffic to an airport are not people who are trying to create a vast movement with a lot of support. They are people trying to consolidate their own sense of their own superiority and that they are so much better than everybody else. They do not want mass support for Palestinians among Americans because they want the right to feel morally superior, when the truth is they're moral idiots, they're moral imbeciles. Of course, Israel is the just party in this war, and they stand with Hamas. Everybody can see it.
Batya, I'm so glad that you mentioned a morally superior elite that's full of imbeciles, because I also wanted to talk to you about what's been going on at National Public Radio. And National Public Radio, for Australian viewers, it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like an even more communist version of Radio National here. A longtime senior editor called out the organization's bias this week, and now they've got a new CEO coming in who seems like she was brought in from woke white woman central casting, and she's all into censorship, and she wants to censor the entire internet. Here's her talking about the First Amendment.
The number one challenge here that we see is, of course, the First Amendment in the United States is a fairly robust protection of rights.
So now you've got this major media outlet in the U.S. headed by somebody who believes in censorship. Batya, this seems to be a real almost sort of attack on journalism from within.
It's so funny, isn't it, James, to see journalists opposed to the First Amendment? The thing that your viewers need to understand is that this is not about politics. She's not an imbecile because she's a leftist. She's an imbecile because she's been educated at elite institutions and is part of an economic elite that has developed extremely intolerant viewpoints to protect their status. This is all about economics. The average listener of NPR used to be your average middle American, middle-income American, middle-class person, working-class person. It is now only the elites that listen to NPR, only the far left, only people with multiple degrees. That's who they're catering to. And you know what? they can have those people, they can keep talking to them. They've basically lost their reputation, but also their mass appeal. If they want to keep talking to, the top 5% of Americans and perpetuating these gross woke ideas, let them have it.
But just, when you do see these sorts of pushes about, misinformation and against free speech, I mean, this is also not just an economic thing, but it's a power grab, too, because these things always seem to run from left to right. We see this in Europe. We see this here in Australia. Is that your observation?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a power grab to protect their status, right? They do not want the voices of the working class Americans who they have disenfranchised to be heard, because that is a threat to their power.
Absolutely. Batya Ungar-Sargon, thank you so much for your time. We're going to have to leave it there for the moment, but we're going to be right back with Alex Stein. And remember a few moments ago when I showed you the reaction when Donald Trump visited a bodega in Harlem a couple of days ago? Well, Joe Biden, to be fair, I want to be very fair and balanced here, he's also a man of the people, and just check out the way people thronged around him when he visited a gas station. I mean, look at them swarm. You can't keep them away. We didn't have audio from that, but I was just waiting to hear the announcement come in over the PA. Would whoever left their grandfather wandering in the purchase area please retrieve him? He's sniffing hair. Thank you. Alex Stein after the break. Well, welcome back to the program, and now it's my great pleasure to bring in one of the best, the pimp on a blimp comedian, Alex Stein, Primetime 99. Alex, welcome to the program. You have been a busy man, sir, attending some pro-Palestine rallies this week. Have a look at this.
Are you guys here protesting? I'm Charlie Kirk. Nice to meet you.
No, I'm good.
What? You guys don't like me?
I'm not interested in doing it.
But you're here protesting. You obviously have a message you want to get across.
I'm not interested in getting it across to you.
Do you got anything you want to say to the people on the internet? What does that mean? This isn't even that good of a sign.
Can you please put that?
What does it say? Can I use this?
Well, that's
Free Palestine. This is the widest Palestinian protest. How do they treat homosexuals?
Absolutely not talking to you.
Those are the cutest earrings I've ever seen.
Absolutely not talking to you right now.
Why?
Free Palestine.
Do they have good gay rights in Palestine?
Palestine.
Do they have pride parades in Palestine?
That doesn't matter when you have a horrible
It doesn't matter if you get thrown off a roof? Would you say that October 7th was bad? This guy is the coolest guy here. He's got the cool earrings. I think my wife's boyfriend has the same earrings. What do you think about Hamas?
Free Palestine.
Look at these. I can make him say Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine. Alex Stein, thank you so much for coming on here. Tell us about this protest, but I got to say, with young people like this out there on university campuses, I got to say I'm feeling pretty good about the future.
Oh my gosh, what a joke. Can you just if you had to describe what the Palestinian protest would look like in Arlington, Texas, there's no better description than 8 white students and 1 Middle Eastern student that are championing a cause that, that guy with the Palestinian earrings, if he wore those earrings in Gaza, he would literally get thrown off a roof. So these people are confused, and I know this as a person who goes to a lot of protests. They're really doing it for the social atmosphere of it. They're not doing it because they really care about the political cause. Because those people, I doubt, are going to go from Arlington, Texas, or ever go to Palestine or Gaza. And if they did, then they should go up there and go fight and help if they really care that much.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's just such a fantastic kind of weenie lameness about this, because in some of these protests I see them and they've actually, they have to read off their phone Free Palestine because our educators haven't given them even the short-term memory to be able to memorize something like that.
I know. I mean, it's a nursery rhyme and they can't even remember it. So, I mean, just think about that. They're looking at their phone, trembling. But, on a serious note, I am a comedian, but when I go to these rallies, I noticed from BLM to the transgender youth rallies, the Palestinian rallies, they're a lot more tense. And that one was not a really good example of how tense they get. But if you're in New York, they had to create the SRG, Strategic Response Group. And that's a sector of the NYPD that is just for stopping protesters because they're sick of it. They're sick of what they're doing and shutting down streets, blocking roads when people are trying to get into work. So, it's kind of sad that a few bad apples can spoil the bunch. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start creating legislation against protests, and then we lose some of our constitutional rights here in America.
Well, yeah, I mean, Alex, what's happening with this? Because I saw this week you had protesters blocking the entrance to Chicago's O'Hare Airport. People were dragging their luggage past these people. They just released a bunch of people who shut down the Golden Gate Bridge with no charges. I mean, surely, though, I'm as big a First Amendment guy as you're going to meet, but this is not First Amendment stuff when you're just causing wanton kind of, inconvenience and economic damage.
No, I mean, listen, I'm a protester. I'm a political activist myself, but you guys have to come up with a smarter way to get your message across instead of blocking people from trying to get to their 9-to-5 job, or people that are trying to fly to see a sick loved one before they pass away, or, maybe go on a family vacation they've saved all year for, on a cruise, missing a flight. Like, these are special occasions that these protesters, they're trying to make their political point, but at what cost? And for me, that's when I became more successful. I started going and speaking at city council meetings very earnestly, but once I started mocking the politicians and I got creative, then my message got across a lot better. So they need to come up with creative solutions instead of just blocking people from trying to live their everyday lives.
Hey, Alex, I thought this was pretty funny, though. At Columbia University, there were a bunch of protesters who claimed that they were sprayed with an Israeli chemical weapon, but it turned out to actually be a fart spray bought off Amazon. Tell us about that.
No, and they do that all the time. I was speaking with Gavin McInnes at Penn State, and it's funny, they said that, some white nationalists sprayed them, but it was really the Antifa group. They caught them on camera, and it was the Antifa that did it. So there's all kinds of agent provocateurs. People want to play the victims. That's what this protest is all about, is about victimhood. And it's sad. It really is. You would think that these people want to be like champions for free speech or champion of their cause, but they have to create lies and create a narrative that they're being attacked with chemical spray. Yet you can literally buy that stuff on Amazon or any joke, store in America. And it stinks, though. Have you ever smelled that fart spray? It's strong. I'm not kidding. I use it, and it is stinky. So I'm a little empathetic to them on that one.
Don't mix that one up with your deodorant. But hey, one more thing, just on a totally different topic here. It seems that the prodigal son of the British royal family is not returning to the UK. He has renounced his British residency, and since this is a U.S. report, we have to report the fact that America has a new migrant. Is this the worst thing that's happened in this whole migrant crisis?
No, it's not. We need to welcome him. Donald Trump, he needs to change his policy that all illegal immigrants are going to get, instead of 2 months of free housing, 6 months of free housing. We need to give all the illegal immigrants green cards so they can vote. No, I mean, obviously I'm kidding. I'm over exaggerating, but listen, that family's a mess. Did you see the video from Max Markle, Meghan's brother, who was, drunk on YouTube, shooting off on her? So these people are just, they're so self-involved. They don't really care about the causes. They get shows on Netflix when they don't even want to make it. Yet you and I, we work our butts off trying to create content and entertain the masses, but they don't have that same pressure that we have because everything is handed to them. So, that's why I have animosity towards him. I really don't care that he lives in America. Actually, I like it because I think the royal family are a bunch of freaks, especially if they're best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, like Prince Andrew. So maybe Prince Harry's doing the right thing by coming to America and getting away from that crazy family.
Well, Alex, hopefully you and Don Terrius can maybe go door knock the prince for your next video here, and we can see if you guys get a bit of hospitality.
I went to Buckingham Palace. They were actually very nice, but I got to send you that video. I had been to Buckingham Palace trying to talk to the Queen.
Fantastic. Thanks for your time. Alex Stein, Primetime 99. Now, Only in America is next, but first, how about some Biden family cooking lore from old Joe himself? Listen to him here tell the stirring, or should I say pot-stirring, tale of what happened to his old Uncle Bosie.
We called him Uncle Bosie. He was shot down. He was in the Army Air Corps before there was an Air Force. He flew single-engine planes, reconnaissance flights over New Guinea. He had volunteered because someone couldn't make it. He got shot down in an area where there were a lot of cannibals living at the time. They never recovered his body, but the government went back when I went down there, and they checked and found some parts of the plane and the like.
Did you hear that? Cannibals! This is, by the way, Biden's new obsession. He told the same story 3 times in the past 24 hours, according to various news reports. And I'll tell you what, I'm starting to get worried that this is the new Joe Biden, Klaus Schwab solution to the climate crisis and the cost of living. I mean, really fine. I'll just eat the bugs. Don't make me bring an Uncle Bozy sandwich in to work. Oh, and by the way, Pentagon records revealed he didn't crash over the jungle. Uncle Bozy died tragically over the ocean. Only in America is next. Welcome back to the program. Don't go anywhere, because now it's time for your favorite and mine, Only in America. This week, let's travel to Oakland, California, second city to San Francisco, but giving it a pretty good run for its money when it comes to Democrat dysfunction. And indeed, after years of defunding the police and soft-on-crime policies, well, as video maker and content creator and host of the Benny Johnson Show, Benny Johnson found out when he traveled there this week, the results have been all too predictable.
Let's go do a scenic tour around Oakland. Such a winter's day. Modern day Oakland, California is a criminal, homeless hellscape. And it didn't need to be like this. 60 years of unified, progressive, Democrat and Marxist control of this city has led to this. The human suffering. Children live like this. American citizens live like this. And no one is stopping it. Why? Because they don't care about you. They actually hate you. That's why the American dream has turned into this nightmare in Oakland, California. But remember, they banned plastic straws, so there's that.
Ah, but no plastic straws? That's the good news, and that's no straw man argument. Boom tish. Sorry, that's all the time we've got for this week. See you next week. Bye-bye.